One of the biggest question marks after watching the Blood of My Blood trailers and promotional materials is what is going to happen to the character of Henry Beauchamp. Now, this is normally where I say be careful of spoilers for the books and the TV show, but we literally have nothing written about Henry in the book canon, so proceed with caution if you are looking to avoid potentially spoilery theories. Now, Henry's story, as it's seen in the promotional material, seems very isolated. We either see him with Julia or we see him alone. And I think that's our biggest indicator that when the two of them travel through the stones, they are not going to the same time. The show has made it very obvious early on that both of Claire's parents are time travelers, which makes sense given that she seems to have amplified powers. We've seen that with Jemmy and Mandy, Bree and Roger's children, and how the children of two time travelers often have some sort of amplified power. And while originally when this show was announced, I thought that they'd probably keep it a secret leading up to the show, whether or not Claire's parents were time travelers, they've definitely leaned into that and are marketing the show with a very, very big emphasis on the fact that these two both time travel. They also are emphasizing this idea of parallel love stories written across time, and that's only true if Henry is in a different timeline, because we have seen Julia with Ellen, so that would mean that their love stories are happening in the same time if Julia and Ellen are together, and clearly that's not the case because we also see Henry jump forward in time in the trailer. So a few things I noticed when watching all the promotional material is that I think this is the first time that Julia and Henry meet each other during the war after they've exchanged letters for some time. I think that they both have a reason to meet. Maybe he has permission to go back to London at some point during the war, and that is when the two of them finally meet one another in this scene here. And I do think it's a very quick courtship. We see them presumably after their wedding returning back to Julia's flat in London. This window gets blown out later during an air raid, so I think this must be before that happens, and probably Henry returns back to the front lines after a time. But I do think that they get married and court while they're home because their relationship was started over their letter exchange and they know they're in love with each other, so it probably happened fairly quickly. Now, something I did notice in the trailers is the color grading and how important it is. That's something that I've always emphasized in the main series, is the color grading. So there are two representations of cars in the color grading sphere. This car appears to be a bright blue. There's also another car that we see them get in the car accident in that looks more black. So I do think that they're two different cars because they would not put so much emphasis on the color grading if that were not the case. We can also see that blue car in the background of this shot here where they are up in the Highlands and it looks like they're on a honeymoon of sorts with one another. The other car we see is this one here that looks like they're getting in a car accident. I feel like this is two different cars unless it is being framed as a flashback and then they changed the color grading to imply that this is a flashback. But part of me really does think that this is two separate instances that they travel to the Highlands. This very quick shot here, you can see it's a brighter blue again, so I might be wrong and it might just be the color grading inconsistency, but it seems like it's two different cars. Now at some point it looks like they go out for a picnic and she's wearing this kind of brownish long coat and skirt combination, which is what we see Julia in after she goes through the stones. It's the same as these promotional images that they took here, and we can see her ring on her finger with a blue gemstone inside of it. And that is significant because if you read the books, then the color blue and the blue car, and anytime you see blue, it's kind of a nod to Claire and her blue healing powers. So I think that Julia goes over this hill and finds Craignadoon. Here's another up-close shot of her wedding band with that really bright blue gem in the middle. And then when we see her waking up on the other side, the gemstone is gone. Now back to Henry. I think he goes searching for Julia after she doesn't come back for a little bit. And in this top two shots here, we can see the color grading is more vibrant than this bottom one. I think this is before he goes through the stones and this one is after, because again, Outlander uses color grading to imply what timeline we're in, and this sort of desaturated one is usually back in the 18th century. Now we see Julia at Castle York, and she is often telling Ellen how it feels to be separated from your true love. So her and Henry have been separated, even though we know that Henry does go back through the stones too. He is seen wearing 18th century clothing. He is seen looking for Julia. He is seen asking around for Julia. And the biggest thing that we see that gives away this timeline is the conversation that he has with Ned Gowan about Julia. And Ned Gowan is at Castle Leoch at this time. And like I said before, every clip we get of Henry, he is going through it. But I think what ends up happening is he goes back in time first, potentially to the wrong timeline, and cannot find her. Then I think he tries to get home and goes too far. And that is when we see him in that futuristic shot here after World War II has ended. There's theories floating around that he is running towards someone familiar who might be helping him find Julia in history. And I don't know how they would, wrap that up neatly with a bow. I really, really hope that they don't make it about Frank, but I feel like they might. Now, this is where the letter portion might come in. They might have communicated with one another through time with their letters, since we've known that this is kind of their established method of communicating. So potentially when he is in the future, he finds a letter from Julia that places her in a timeline that he can find her again. But we also know that Ellen helps her escape. I think if Julia were pregnant when she goes through the stones initially, and she has that added pressure to get back to Henry because of her pregnancy, Ellen would be more motivated as well to help her escape if she has that kind of added layer to her story and trying to escape Castle Leoch. So I think that is what's happening with Julia. She is alone there trying to get back to Henry, and Henry and her are in two very different times because he went forward and she stayed back. These two shots here of Henry crying, I think, are obviously another maybe like a missed moment between the two of them. And I really don't know how many times they're going to have these two traveling in this first season, especially since we know they've already greenlit season 2. So I'm really not sure if they're going to spread the time travel out, but it is confirmed that he travels at least twice. We know that they had Claire at the end of 1918. She was born in October. And I think that this shot here, Henry looks a little nervous. And then this is exactly the same positioning that they're in after they deliver Claire and they're holding her in her arms. So I think they have Claire, they're back together in their own timeline and carry out raising her for a couple of years before they return to Scotland again for their second honeymoon. And then this second honeymoon is where they do end up in a car crash and potentially go back through the stones again. I think people theorize that they end up going back through and staying there and can't get home, and that is why Claire's end up being raised by her uncle Lamb. Now, in terms of Henry's character, I have analyzed his uniform quite a bit, and I know some people have wondered if he might have been a medic in the military, and that is where Claire got her interest in medicine from. But all signs point to that not being the case. Normally, the medics would have a few key indicators on their uniform to identify them as a medic. This pin is the biggest giveaway. Normally, a pin for a medic would have that serpent that is usually on all like EMT identifiers, and this one almost looks like a regime badge. These badges were kind of used to identify where each regime was from. The closest one I could find was York and Lancaster, but it's not an exact match. And the second portion of his uniform that means he's not a medic is this belt here. This is called a Sam Brown belt, and it's usually worn by military officers. This is all heavy speculation. I could be way off base, but I definitely think it'll be interesting to see how much they fit into this first season now that we know for a fact that we're getting a season 2. I also am curious to see how much of Claire we get, because she was 5 years old when her parents went missing and supposedly died in a car accident. I don't want to say I'm nervous about where they're going to take this storyline, but I am nervous about how they're going to weave it into the main timeline of the Outlander show. So time will tell, as they say. Let me know your theories about Henry in the comments. And yeah, I really can't wait to see how they shape his character in Blood of My Blood.